Thank you, Deborah. And it's so good to see a lot of friends in the audience. My former boss and friend, Nora Lustig, friend George Shedek, and Minister Nuri, whom I had the privilege of seeing yesterday. I wanted to speak from the lectern because I didn't want to give you the impression that I'm old. I'm not. And there's no reflection on either to James or to Murray. And then the second reason is that having been a teacher for more than 20 years, it always feels comfortable when you are speaking from the lectern rather than sitting. So that's the second reason. In terms of the band, I don't know where do I fit. We talked about Mick Jagger. Murray seemed to me like John Denver, which is not a band, but I don't know where I fit. But let's move forward. The focus of this particular session is that what would a world would look like without poverty. So let me start with a very simple question from the human development perspective. What would the world without poverty look like from a human development lens? I think such a world from a human development lens would look like with 5 distinctive things. First, there would be enhanced human choices for every human being. Second, there would be enlarged freedom to exercise those choices. Third, there will be extended capabilities and enlarged opportunities for every human being. Fourth, there would be enough human rights to protect those choices and adequate human security to ensure those choices. And fifth, that income would be one of those choices, but not the only choice and not the most important choice. This would feed into other choices, but that's not. And basically, the point here is income is not the sum total of human life. So the lack of it cannot be the sum total of human deprivation either. So therefore, that's what the world without poverty would look like from a human development perspective. Question number 1. Does the world without poverty would mean overcoming a poverty line? From what I have just said, the simple answer is no. Because we all know that a poverty line is defined most of the times in terms of some income, in terms of some consumption, or in terms of a combination of both. And they have their values in terms of mapping poverty, in terms of providing guidance to policies, and all that. But that particular poverty line would not be adequate enough to signal a world without poverty for 3 fundamental reasons. Number 1, that poverty line would not take into account all the other dimensions of human life which human beings value. Some of those things have been talked about both by James and Murray. And if we insist on using that particular income poverty line as a kind of a signal whether we are without poverty, then either you have to assume that the income poverty is the only kind of poverty, or you have to assume that all other kinds of deprivations can be translated in terms of income. Neither of those assumptions are correct. So therefore, for the simple fundamental reason that poverty is multidimensional, goes beyond income, overcoming a poverty line would not give the kind of the signal that we are living in a world without poverty. The second fundamental reason is when we look at the poverty it cannot be a snapshot. You look at a number for a particular year in a particular country, fine. But we also know from the dynamics of poverty that there is a movement inside the poverty trap and there are movements out of poverty. So therefore, if at a particular time you see that the world is without poverty or a country is without poverty, in these days with shocks and vulnerabilities, which has become norm rather than exceptions, you may have situation that one particular point in time, a group of people are outside of the poverty line or above the poverty line, but they may move into the poverty trap pretty soon. Therefore, just looking at a income poverty line would not signal to you whether this particular dynamics, how it is working, and may actually misguide you. Third and the final fundamental reason why such a line would not signal a world without poverty is simple. When we talk about the poverty line, as both James and Murray have alluded to, you don't know where you are setting it. Are you setting it in terms of a minimum income? Are you setting it in terms of certain calories? Are you setting it up in terms of other kinds of consumptions? The whole question of dollar a day versus national poverty lines are very much there. Even for $1 a day, what is the kind of the baskets of goods you are taking into account? What are the prices that you are taking into account there? Even for a particular country, the national poverty line has changed over time. India is a classic example. I mean, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, there have been so many revisions of the poverty lines that sometimes, even in a particular country, there is no comfortable basis for comparison over time. So therefore, given all those issues related to the poverty line, you cannot use it to make the conclusion that the world is without poverty or has achieved the zero poverty. I think the second question that this particular session is looking at, is there a kind of a reference to the whole question of minimum well-being? Does it mean that the world of poverty, does it mean that there is minimum well-being? My observations on these particular questions are threefold. Number one is the word minimum. Because I think from my perspective, when we talk about human development, we talk about enlarging the choices. We are not talking about providing some kind of a minimum. Second, when you talk of the minimum, sometimes the perception is you are taking a kind of a welfare approach or a kind of a basic needs approach. You are not trying to enlarge people's choices, giving them the freedom of choosing, but you're basically deciding what are the kind of the minimum bundle, minimum provisions you are trying to make to them. It implies that the people who are poor are at the receiving end, and they are not the active agents in deciding the issues which influence their life. And the third, with the word well-being. Well-being has been interpreted in different ways. Sometimes well-being is interpreted as being able to do certain things. Sometimes it is interpreted in terms of having minimum income. And in the Bhutanese case, the whole question of well-being is being happy. So therefore, how you define that kind of well-being is also very much important. The third question is, for this particular session is, what is the relevance of multidimensional poverty and relative poverty in the whole discussion? I think on the issue of the multidimensional poverty, there have been lots that have been said, both by James and Murray. Overall, in terms of the measure in the South African context, so I will not go there. But I just want to remind ourselves that over the years, there have been so many attempts to look at the multidimensionality of poverty as well as its measurement. The whole issue of multidimensional poverty was raised in the Human Development Report 1997. And that issue was also raised in the World Development Report 2000, which was directed by Nora. Now, in terms of the multidimensional poverty and its measures, I think it is important to remember three things. One is any kind of measure, any kind of index must be anchored in a solid theoretical foundation. Measures or indices should not be driven either by mathematical jugglery or by statistical considerations. Unless measures have strong, solid theoretical foundations, it won't take us to that far. So that's number one. Second, whatever measures or indices we develop, those need to be disaggregated. Disaggregated in terms of regions, disaggregated in terms of socioeconomic groups, ethnicity, race, and most importantly, disaggregated in terms of gender, women and men. When you talk about the multidimensionality of poverty, the whole question of time use of women and the time poverty or time deprivation by women within the household, outside the household, is a major dimension of poverty. And finally, I think when we are talking about the measures, we should not put all our eggs into quantitative measure. The quantitative measure must be supplemented and complemented with qualitative measure, with perception survey. In simple poverty work also, we have also seen how the PRA, the participatory approach, have really enriched our understanding of poverty. In some cases, they've indicated the quantitative measure, which is good. In some cases, they raised a number of other issues, which mean that you have to go to the drawing board again and look at the whole question of the issue. I'm very glad that Murray has raised the issue of quality of education, quality of health services. So it's not only the quantitative, in quantitative terms, how much you are getting out of educational or health services, but what is the type of services that you are getting. That is absolutely important. And disaggregation is also important because we want to get rid of the tyranny of averages. And we all know that famous joke about averages. Half of your body may be in the oven, the other half may be in the refrigerator, and on average you would be comfortable. Then comes the question of the relevance of relative poverty, which is basically inequality. This will be the defining problem of human societies in coming days. And I think the three issues I want to highlight here is that when we talk about inequalities, we have a tendency of looking at inequalities in terms of outcomes. It is absolutely important to look at inequalities in terms of opportunities, because that determines outcomes. So that's number one. The second one is that we have to look at the inequality issue because we have evidence where growth is taking place, society is moving, but so the inequality is also increasing. China is a classic example. We all always talk about China in terms of its growth success, but the inequalities between Shanghai, Beijing, and the coastal areas and hinterland China is absolutely increasing. So the inequalities will not only have or not only has economic implications, they have social and political implications, and we should be aware of that. And finally, lots of people in lots of societies see inequalities as a form of injustice. I mean, in the US case, the top 1% and the share of income and wealth in the top 1%, I'm not even talking about top 10%, the top 1%, and even the bottom 1% of that top 1% is increasing. So in that particular situation, the social cohesion, the stability of the society, the political consequences, these are absolutely important issues that we have to think about. In conclusion, I think as we move forward, particularly again looking from the HDI perspective, there are issues which we have to be engaged together to decide to move forward. From a human development perspective, we always talk about individual choices, individual capabilities, individual opportunities. But there will be instances, and there are instances, where the individual choices and the collective choices do not move in the same direction. There are tensions between the two. And if there are tensions, what would be the trade-off? What would be the kind of the policies that need to be taken? When we talk about education, health, standard of living, particularly in the context of human development, we assume that they are equally important to people. They are not. Depending on the context of the situation, depending on different groups, there are hierarchies. There are priorities there. If you go to Liberia right now, and if you ask anybody in Liberia, what is the development challenge at this point in time? It is basically the outbreak of Ebola. It is nothing else. So therefore, if there are hierarchies among the choices, and that is also important to determine the whole question of the weights, how you are assigning weights to different choices when you are coming up with a kind of a measurement there. This is also an important issue. And finally, I think in the whole discussion, deliberations on development, political economy is important, and human rights is also important. Those are something we should never forget. In conclusion, with the theme of this conference is World Without Poverty, which is WWP. Looking at the audience and looking at so many young faces, I would rather say that the theme of this particular conference is also World with Wellbeing, which would be WWW, which may resonate more to the younger people who are in the audience. Thank you very much.